So, Shalom, live hier vom Mishkan. So, wir hatten gerade eine kleine Einführung. Das meiste hier vom Mishkan besteht aus dem Akazienbaum. Wir werden dazu später nochmal drauf eingehen. Wir haben jetzt erstmal eine kleine Führung. Und ich hoffe, ihr hört auch unseren Guide.
The first thing that we see when we come into the courtyard is the altar. The altar was made of acacia wood covered in copper, and inside of it was the eternal fire. God was the one who started that fire when they first built the tabernacle, but it was called the eternal fire because they were never allowed to let it burn out. So every day, the Levites were the tribe that had to carry the tabernacle from place to place. The Levites had to go out and collect wood to keep the fire burning constantly. And, of course, this is where they made all of the sacrifices. There were different kinds of sacrifices with different purposes, different meanings and reasons and ceremonies and animals. The most important of these sacrifices was called, in English, the atonement sacrifice, or in Hebrew, korban hakapara. In German, I believe it's the Sühne offering.
Sündopfer.
It was the most important of the sacrifices at the time because its purpose was to atone, to forgive the sins of the Israelites. And because it was the most important, only the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, was allowed to perform that sacrifice, whereas all the other sacrifices could be done by the regular Kohanim. And it was only done once a year. All the other sacrifices were every other day of the year. All right? On each corner of the altar was a horn. We call them the horns of the altar. The priests would take the blood from all the sacrifices and they would sprinkle it on the horns of the altar. And they served a special purpose. If anyone killed someone by accident, not on purpose, or was accused of murder, then he could run in and grab the horn. And as long as he was touching the horn, no one was allowed to hurt him or touch him or kill him until the Kohen HaGadol came, investigated, and decided if he was innocent or guilty. The most famous example of that in the Hebrew Bible is Yoav. Yoav was a commander in David's army, and he murdered David's son, Absalom. He ran in, grabbed the horn, but eventually did receive the punishment he deserved. All right, so you can walk up the ramp, look inside the altar, and then we'll continue on to the next item. Yeah. You can go up and look inside. There you go.
But they were built like for, I mean, they were like 4 walls, right?
There were.
I mean, here we have 4 walls.
Right.
There was like 4 walls.
Yeah. This is more or less the actual size of the altar that was at the time. It was 5 by 5 cubits and 3 cubits tall.
Okay. How heavy was that?
We don't know for sure. It was for sure the single heaviest piece that they had to carry.
Right.
Because
how many levies were there? I mean, were carrying it?
That's a good question. This specifically?
Yes.
We also don't know. Most likely the poles to carry it were probably much thicker and probably much longer. Possibly up to 6, 7, maybe even 8 people on each corner.
Each corner?
Yeah, possibly up to 8 people on each corner, all total carrying the altar together. So there probably, possibly up to 32 people. The Torah, the Bible briefly mentions that the walls of the tabernacle were hollow, so it wasn't as heavy as it might seem as it was. Also, acacia wood is very durable. Acacia wood is very durable, very strong, but also lightweight, easy to carry. So even with all these factors taken into consideration, it probably still was incredibly heavy, especially because of the copper.
Like pretty heavy anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also have a question.
Yes.
Did the Mishkan when the temple was built,
Right.
did the Mishkan turn into the Kodesh HaKodeshim?
Kind of. Well, we were kind of talking about this before you guys came. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, it traveled through the desert for 40 years. It sat in Shiloh, north of Jerusalem, for 370 years until King David moved it to Jerusalem. It sat in Jerusalem for another 70 years until King Solomon, King Shlomo, built the first temple. Now, we don't know for sure 100% what happened, but I think what happened to the Mishkan, but the most likely scenario is that King Solomon probably stripped the tabernacle of its material and recycled it for the temple. Probably. That's probably very likely. But the holy items, such as especially the Ark of the Covenant, was just transferred to the temple as it was. It wasn't changed as far as we know. So behind the altar was the copper wash base, or the laver. The Hebrew word for this, in Hebrew, this is called the kiyol, which in modern Hebrew just means sink. This was made of pure copper, unlike the altar, which was wood covered in copper. And the Bible briefly mentions that this was also made of the mirrors of the women. Women who donated their mirrors, women who served outside the courtyard of the tabernacle, who donated their mirrors made of polished copper to make the wash base. So, you know, kids, when you're in the bathroom, you're brushing your teeth, right, and you can see your reflection in the mirror in front of you, right? So it's very likely that the priests, the Kohanim, probably saw their own reflection when they looked in here. Only here they did not brush their teeth. Here they had to wash themselves. They had to purify themselves, their hands and their feet. To keep the water clean, they didn't wash their hands like this, because then it would have filled up with blood and dirt. Ugh. Instead, they would scoop the water outside and would wash their hands and their feet outside of the wash base. And they had to do that every time before making a sacrifice or before going into the tent. This symbolizes purification. It shows how we need to be purified before we can enter into Hashem's presence. But what's really interesting here is the placement of the wash base. It sat in between the altar and the tent. Why is that significant? Because in most other religions, you'll see that the washing or the cleansing is usually the first thing that you see, or the first thing that you have to do before entering into the sacred place. So why did God command them to place first the altar and then the wash base? Why not the other way around?
Because maybe the altar is more kadosh than
Maybe. I mean, the most kadosh, the most holy, is the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodeshim. But I think you're in the right direction. God says, and I think this is a point that many Jews actually miss today, that they don't think about it in this way. God says in the Bible, in the Tanakh, many times, that there is no atonement of sin without blood. Leviticus 17:11, it is through blood that the soul can be atoned. So in order for us to be purified, first there must be a sacrifice. And that's what I believe God is trying to show us through the placement of the items, that it is through the blood of the sacrifice God purifies us, and then we can enter into His presence.
Yeah, but if then like that, why do first they wash their hands?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Why did they have to wash their hands before making the sacrifice, as well as far as the order of the actions they had to do? I would have to really look into the details, because there's a lot of details. How they were to perform the sacrifice, very strict instructions. But the point I was making more has to do with the placement of the items, and not as much with the way or the order of the actions that they had to perform it in. But I'm sure there is some significance.
It's just common that if you need to use in two different dimensions, that's more common that it will be in the central, right?
The what?
Meaning that when you're washing your hands and the feet, that the same amount of the meters or whatever.
Yeah.
between the altar and the distance, right? So there's like exactly the middle of the.
Well, I don't think the Torah actually says the exact distance between, let's say, the gate and the altar to the wash base and the wash base to the tent. I don't know if it says the distance between them.
It says.
But it does say the placement. The altar and then the.
Yeah, but if you have a reverse, meaning that washing point will have it here, and then you need to go to the Mishkan, then you have to walk pretty far. So you have like more convenience.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, even logistically, yeah. There might also be practical or logistical reason.
But
yeah.
Let's check it out.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I don't think these things are limited to only one interpretation.
Of course.
Solely. I'm sure there's multiple meanings and multiple interpretations to everything. Right.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. All right.
But one second.
Yes.
The vessel was only one.
The what?
The place to wash, there was only one.
Correct.
Place. There were not like several, right?
Correct.
Okay, because in the Beit HaMikdash there was like
in Beit HaMikdash, I don't know about several, but it was definitely much larger. It was massive.
Yeah, but it was
and the Tanakh also describes not just the size, but also like what it looked like in the 12 bowls, 3 on each side, and even faucets that you could open and close to wash your hands and feet instead of having to scoop the water out every time. The Bible calls that Solomon's sea, or the sea, like the ocean. Mm-hmm. But in the Mishkan, it was pretty simple.
If you think on the journey of the Israelites, how they get here, not directly here, but to the Mishkan, you had, first of all, the sacrifice of the Pesach, so like kind of the altar, and then they had to go to the sea through the water, and then they had the revelation of God on the House Sinai, because
that's really cool.
Also, that every single piece is an image of the man or the universe or the temple or whatever.
Or the relationship between man and God.
Really different things. It's also the history of the people of Israel is also inscripted in all the things.
That's a good point. That's really interesting that they had to make the sacrifice of Pesach before crossing the Red Sea. That's very interesting.
Because when they crossed the sea, it was also some kind of purification when they came out
or symbolize
from the old life, from slavery, from the impurity of Egypt. They had to go to a mikveh and then to receive after 49 days the Torah.
I've never thought about that.
Representing
that's
the holy.
Really interesting. All right. You know what? Before we go in, let's go over here and we'll talk a little bit about logistics, and then we'll finally go inside. I'm going to use that in the future, by the way. I never thought about that with the sacrifice and then the crossing of the Red Sea. I like that. So, the main pieces of the tabernacle were these big panels made of acacia wood covered in gold. Each panel was 1.5 cubits wide by 10 cubits tall. So the whole height of the tabernacle was between 4.5 to 5 meters. It's a little bit bigger than Legos. There were 48 of these panels total, 20 on one side, 20 on the other, and 8 in the back. Each panel had a few things to hold it in place to keep it from falling apart. First of all, they were attached to each other by these hooks that they were attached to one another. Secondly, they had these poles, also made of acacia wood covered in gold. There were 5 poles on each side. 4 on the outside that were held in place by these rings, and another 5th pole that ran inside the boards all the way to the back. So it was really, really durable, really strong. There was no way it would ever come apart by itself. The third thing that held it in place were these big silver bases. Each panel had 2 of these bases made of pure silver. Each base weighed a talent. A talent is a measurement of weight used in the Torah. somewhere between 35 to 40 kilograms, each one. It's incredibly heavy. So if we're talking about the silver just for the bases of the Mishkan itself, we're talking over 3 tons of pure silver. So we know that it was the Levites that had to carry this, but do any of you know how many Levites were required? Any guesses?
Like 2,000?
2,000?
Yeah.
Any other guesses?
Just for the silver?
For everything.
For everything? 22,000?
So the book of Numbers gives very precise numbers of Levites. It gives detailed descriptions of the different groups and families that the tribe of Levi were divided into, and it says exactly how many men from each of these groups helped carry the Mishkan. If you add the numbers up in a calculator, you'll get to a large and precise number of 8,580 men. So these 8,500 men for 40 years had to repeatedly take it apart and rebuild again and again until they finally arrived at Shiloh.
Was it like that they were building it and then they were switching? That some like don't do it.
I think that's very, very likely that the 8,500 probably didn't all work at the same time in the same moment. But yeah, I think it has to do with also taking turns, taking shifts, and things like that, or multiple people carrying certain pieces at a time. And I think that also includes not only carrying the tabernacle itself, but anything and everything that has to do with the logistics of the tabernacle, such as finding wood for the fire, or finding water for the wash base, and so on.
Did they have some kind of wagons to carry all the stuff?
Yes, the 6 holy items. The 6 holy items, God specifically commanded that they had to carry by hand, but everything else could be carried on wagons or carts pulled by animals, but not necessarily have to.
Okay.
So, like this, for example, they could choose to either carry it on a wagon or to carry it by hand. So, let's finally go inside.
Herzlich willkommen im Heiligsten.
Very good. So, the whole compound can be divided into 3 sections. First section is outside, called the courtyard, or in Hebrew, Hachatzel. Second part is this room where we're all standing in. This is called the holy place, the Kodesh in Hebrew, or the Heilig. The Heilig.
Das ist das Heiligste.
The third part, where
Und das ist
he's
das,
about to go in there, that is the Holy
Allerheiligste.
of Holies,
Da
Kodesh
gehen wir gleich
HaKodeshim,
dann rein.
Allerheiligste. Into the courtyard, only the tribe of Levi were allowed to enter, and the rest of the Israelites couldn't come in. They had to wait outside the gate. The only exception for a non-Levite to enter into the courtyard was to drop the horns of the altar, as we spoke about before. Other than that, only the Levites. Into the holy place, only the priests, the Kohanim, were allowed to come in. And into the Holy of Holies, only the Kohen Gadol, the high priest.
Only one day.
And only one day a year. What day is that?
Kippurim.
Give me a high five. Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. The same day that he had to make the atonement sacrifice that we were talking about before. About a year ago, I was giving the tour to a group of children from America, and I asked them the question, which day did the Kohen Gadol enter into the Holy of Holies? And one little boy about your age shouted, Christmas! On the north side of the tabernacle was the table of showbread.
Der Schabbrottisch.
In Hebrew, lechem hapanim. We don't know exactly what kind of bread was used. The Bible doesn't exactly describe if it was pitas like this, or if it was matzahs, or challahs, or French baguette. But we know 12 loaves of bread. Why 12? 12 tribes. It symbolizes God's provision for for the 12 tribes of Israel, not only for the Kohanim and Leviim, but for all of Israel. Also, how many months are in a year?
Which
1,000?
12.
Oh, 12, right. I'm deaf in one ear. 12, right. 12 months in a year symbolizes how God provides all year long, not just at specific times. It is a symbol of God's provision for all of his people and all the time. But it was only symbolic because only the Kohanim were allowed to eat from the bread, and they ate it once a week, every Shabbat.
Yeah, but there's also something like that that's not only from the month of the year, it's also from the groups on the groups of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Like
The 12 tribes, right?
12 tribes.
Exactly. That's the point, is that it's, God provides for everyone and for all 12 tribes and all year long.
And you have also 12 zodiacs.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting. Right. When they ate the bread, they ate it with olive oil and a plant called, in English, hyssop, or in Hebrew, ezov. Ezov is used to make a common Israeli spice called za'atar. Have any of you tried za'atar?
Yes.
It's good stuff. So, as we eat it today, the Kohanim also, 3,600 years ago.
Is this also the actual size, or is this?
So the
it
size
seems
of
a
the
bit
menorah,
small.
the Torah doesn't actually give us the exact size and dimensions of the menorah, but it does give us the weight. And based on the weight, we can roughly guess the size of it, and that it was made of pure gold. So it's somewhere between 80 to 90 kilograms of pure gold. So based on that, we can more or less guess the size of it. This was made of pure gold, and it was made of one solid piece of gold, meaning they didn't take different pieces and attach them or weld them together. Instead, they took one big solid chunk of gold and they shaped it and molded it and hammered it to get this beautiful piece of artwork. It didn't burn with a candle like we might celebrate today in Hanukkah. Rather, it burned with olive oil and a little piece of string that came out the front called a wick, or in Hebrew, til. Mm-hmm. Ooh. Here we go. So, similar to the eternal flame that was outside. Ooh, hot.
That's the reason why it was
You get the idea.
like all the time.
Yeah, it was
Right. This was lit all the time from the eternal flame. They were not allowed to light a new fire to get this going. And it was the only source of light in the whole room. So try to imagine if all the walls were covered in gold, all of that light would have reflected off the walls and light up the whole room. One of the most beautiful things you can imagine.
Yeah, but the menorah lights, were they like the same, like a fire of the sacrifice?
Yes, yeah. Now, it didn't burn when they traveled from place to place, but they had to light it from that fire. They were not allowed to light a new fire or a different fire. They had to use specifically that eternal fire. Not what I did here. What was the first thing God created ever? Light. And the Lord said, "Let there be light." And boom, there was light. God is the source of light. Just as the menorah was the only source of light in the whole room, God is the one who lights up the universe, both physically and spiritually.
Like that, what you said, that the God's light, like in Pesach when there was like the burning tree, and
Right.
That's like him.
The burning bush, right? God revealed himself to Moses in the burning bush, right? Very good.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did it look exactly the same?
Well, the Torah describes the menorah as having a button flower 3 times on each branch,
Okay.
and 3 also down the middle.
I actually asked
Button
because
flower.
the way it looks, you said it's a flower. For me, it resembles the pomegranate, which kind of seems sort of
Interesting.
to Judaism
Well,
right now. So I was wondering whether it actually did
I don't know
the
about a
same.
pomegranate. The Bible says that it's meant to be an almond flower,
Okay.
which almonds also have great significance in the Hebrew Bible. In Jeremiah chapter 1, God says, I have given you the almond flower as a sign that I am closely watching over you. But in Hebrew, it's a play on words because the Hebrew word for almond and to watch over something is the same word in Hebrew, shaked or shoked. Almonds also represent eternity, like the eternity of God. The almond flower is the first flower to bloom before the spring, showing that spring is near. But the almonds themselves are the last to be harvested after the spring. So it is the first before the spring and the last after the spring. The first and the last, the beginning and the end. It shows God's eternity, God's eternal nature, which also has to do with his personal name. Yud He Vav He is short for Haya Hoveh Ve'ihiyeh, which means who was and is and will be. The Hebrew word to be or to exist is Heyeh. So God's personal name, just as we all each have a personal name that have meaning to it, God's personal name literally means his eternal existence.
How were they able to make this in one piece?
In one piece, pure gold is a relatively soft metal, so it's not that hard to actually to shape it. I mean, they didn't mine one large piece of gold. I mean, they would have had to collect a lot of gold, melt it into one chunk, and slowly hammered it.
With hammers?
With hammers, with chisels, with all sorts of tools, until they finally got this shape little by little. But
however, the last week portion says that the Moshe Rabbeinu had a issue of how to did this and how that needs to be good. So they did it, but he was not sure that it's good. So what he did, he threw this one piece of menorah, what he did, into the fire. Hashem recreated and moved it back. So that's what the Rashi was saying last week. So we don't know. That's the reason the Chabad are making
that's not in the Torah, but yeah, it does say, the Bible does say that God gave wisdom to Moses and to Bezalel, who physically built all of this. Bezalel received wisdom from God how to make it as well. Now, I don't think he physically built everything by himself. I think he had a whole team of people that he was responsible for.
The chief of manager.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, chief manager, producer, you could call it. Yeah, or director rather. Moses being the producer,
CEO.
and God being and Bezalel being the director. Having received wisdom from God how to build it.
So in Jerusalem, there is this big menorah in front of this synagogue. So this is much bigger. So did they have a different menorah in the temple, a bigger one than in the Mishkan?
Yes. Everything was blown up in proportions when Solomon replaced the tabernacle with the temple. Many changes between the tabernacle and the temple, and even more changes, surprisingly, between the first and second temples. For example, the tabernacle was, the temple was massive. It was huge. The second temple was almost twice as big as the first temple.
And the third one will be even bigger.
And the third temple will even be bigger, right? So for example, if we're, let's say, just talking about the altar outside, right? The altar out here is 5 by 5 cubits and 3 cubits tall. That's about 2.5 by 2.5 meters and 1.5 meters tall, right? The altar in Solomon's temple was bigger than the tabernacle, was bigger than the Mishkan. That was 10 cubits tall and 30 cubits by 30 cubits wide. So 3 times as big as this. So everything was blown up in proportions. Everything was made bigger and better, quote unquote.
So, but God has given us the instruction to build this, that
Right.
it can be among us. So
Right.
then we build a bigger temple, then another bigger temple,
And another
now we
big,
want to build another bigger temple.
Right.
So what God actually said that He wants to live in this.
right.
So how it's a good idea to make another big temple.
God is a very, very intimate God. He desires intimacy and a personal relationship. And to a certain degree, also, God is a humble God as well. I think that's why He commanded us to build this. Whereas God did not give the instructions to build the temples afterward. Who designed the temple? David. And then Solomon built based on David's design, not based on God's design. So remember, like as we said before, God gave the instructions to build this, and it is us, men, people, who like to change God's instructions. Mm-hmm. All right. Up next, the altar of incense, in Hebrew called Mizbech HaKtoret, or in German, the Räucher altar. Here, they did not sacrifice animals like they did outside, but here, every day, the Kohanim had to offer up incense. They would take different plants and herbs and flowers, and they would grind it into a nice fine powder and sprinkle it on the altar, and it would fill the room with a beautiful smell, a beautiful aroma. They had to do that twice a day, every day, in the morning when they woke up, and in the evening before they went to bed. That was part of the daily burnt offering ceremony. That was also twice a day, morning and evening. That beautiful, sweet smell symbolizes prayer, symbolizes the prayers of the Israelites going up to heaven, as well as our prayers today. In Psalm 141, King David asks God to accept his prayer as if it were a sweet perfume. So when we pray, God thinks of it as a beautiful fragrance. And in my opinion, the fact that they had to do this twice a day, morning and evening, further symbolizes how we should open our day in prayer before God and to end our day in prayer before God. So there were two types of Kohanim. There was a regular Kohen who was dressed only in white. And so I see you came prepared, just in white. But the Kohen Gadol was dressed far more beautifully. His outfit was so important that there is a whole chapter in the Torah that talks entirely about the clothes of the high priest. That is Exodus chapter 28. There it describes all the different layers and pieces and colors that he had to wear. On his breastplate were written the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe had its own unique precious stone to represent it. Those in Hebrew are called Avnei HaChoshen. On his shoulders were written the names of the 12 sons of Jacob, of Yaakov, written according to age that they were born, from oldest to youngest, from Reuben to Benjamin. Across his forehead was a crown of gold on which was written holiness to the Lord. Now, when we read in English, the Lord, usually written in all caps, in German it would be der Herr, right? It's not actually translating from the Hebrew word Lord, Adonai, but rather referring to God's very personal name that we spoke about before, Yud He Vav He. On the bottom, you have these bells and pomegranates. That's, I think, where you were thinking of the pomegranates. A bell of pomegranate, bell pomegranate all around. Whenever he walked around outside, the Israelites would hear the bells and know that the Kohen Gadol was nearby. He had a very, very, very important role. He was what we call a mediator between God and the people of Israel. So, who is the first Kohen Gadol? The first one.
Moshe was the first one, and the second was Aaron.
Aaron was the first one, but Aaron was the first one. Moshe was not a Kohen, but God, he was a Levite, so he could enter into the courtyard, but he wasn't a Kohen, so he couldn't actually come in here. But he did meet with God face to face in a separate tent of meeting outside the camp, also called in Hebrew Ohel Moed. So there's some confusion sometimes between that and this.
especially that they were brothers.
Especially that they were brothers, right? So Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, the first Kohen Gadol, chosen by God to make a sacrifice on behalf of all the Israelites around him so that they could receive forgiveness of sin. They couldn't make the sacrifice on their behalf. They had to rely on someone higher than them, someone above them, whom God had chosen to make a sacrifice on their behalf so that they could receive forgiveness of sin. So, any questions?
They did not have any shoes?
Correct. No shoes, no sandals, no Crocs, and no Nikes. Just plain bare feet, and also no flooring. No wood flooring, no carpeting or anything. Just whatever they landed on was whatever they walked on.
Because when Moshe was at the burning bush, also God commanded him to
remove his shoes.
Yes, and also when Yeshua came into the land, Joshua, then also he was commanded, I think, by the angel to put his shoes.
I don't remember
away.
that, but I'll need to check. But yeah, sometimes when we walk on holy ground, God calls us to remove the shoes from our feet. For we walk on holy ground.
So there was in the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. So there's a glass box. There's also a high priest in there. It's written that you have the 72 ringelingel.
Yeah.
The bells.
Bells and 72 pomegranates. Yeah. So it's
I don't know if the Torah. I don't think the Torah says how many bells and how many pomegranates. There might have been 72, but it doesn't say how many. But it does say that it went all around. Ours actually doesn't. On the back here, we don't have any. But the real one went all around.
72 and 72 each of them.
Yeah, probably. It might have been. Yeah. One of these bells may. That there was a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, a golden bell was found in the city of David, and I think is being held in a museum. A pure gold bell that might have actually been from the high priest. It didn't look like this. It was more like round and hollowed.
I have a quick question about the Mishkan itself. That if there is anything about that, there is a place where you can't build a Mishkan, meaning that where they land, because you say that they were built, but there is any specific rules that you can't build here or there, or there is.
Well, they carried it from place to place for 40 years. So
I don't know, the rock on the left that you can't build because of something. There was such a rules? No. You know what I mean?
Any prohibition of where it can't be.
Oh, where it can't be.
Yeah, because of something. There's always something.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I know that God was the one who showed them where to place it every time, by the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night, which was God's Holy Spirit showing them when to stop and when to keep moving and where to land to set it up every time. But after the 40 years, again, it sat in Shiloh for 370 years. I don't think God commanded David to bring it to Jerusalem. I think that was David's idea as well.
But if David wouldn't move, then would Shiloh be one of the most?
If David had not moved it, that's a really interesting question. If David had not moved it, it probably would have stayed in Shiloh, and I guess it would have continued to operate in Shiloh. Maybe eventually, maybe not Solomon, but maybe someone might have eventually replaced it with a temple in Shiloh. So, yeah, maybe Shiloh would have turned into a holy place. That's a good question.
There's a comment about this. You can read more about this.
Very interesting.
You know why it was placed in Shiloh?
Why it was placed in Shiloh?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that was the last place where that the pillar landed.
So God wanted it to be there.
I believe that's where. Yeah.
So it's the territory of Ephraim, right?
Correct.
And Ephraim was giving the firstborn right with the blessing when Jacob blessed the sons
correct.
of
even though it was
of
his
Joseph.
brother that was,
And also
Menashe was older than him.
Yehoshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, and
Correct.
they took the bones from Joseph when they came into the land, and they also were buried at the same time and at the same place. So actually the right was in the tribe of Ephraim. So, but when they did not behave as God wanted, I think that's the reason why he took it away from Ephraim and gave it to the tribe of Yehuda through David.
Right. It's an interesting point. I think there is some truth to that.
But if when Moshe couldn't come to Israel, Hashem did that only because they would like not pray to him
Well, because
when he dies. And then what
Moshe-
happens with the Kohen HaGadol when he dies? Because they can also pray to him because he goes to Kohen HaGadol.
well, they were not allowed to pray to the Kohen Gadol. They had to respect him. They had to show some respect and fear toward him because he was appointed by God. But he is not God. God does not want us to pray to physical things or physical people. But when the Kohen Gadol died, his oldest son would take his place as Kohen Gadol, and then it was passed from father to oldest son, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm.
But what if, like, for example, the oldest one is not a boy? Then there's still
Then it would go to the oldest boy. I think, yeah. But yeah, I mean, these are good questions to ask. Yeah, if the oldest one was a sister, then it would just go to her brother.
It would be you if you're
Right.
basically.
Exactly.
That's why asking.
Do you have an older sister? I have an older sister. I'm the second oldest in the family, and I have one sister older than me. All right. So, in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, was the Ark of the Covenant. Today, there are only two that know where the real Ark of the Covenant is today. The first of which is God Almighty, and the second is Indiana Jones. Of course, the point behind that joke is that nobody but God knows where it is. And I personally believe that God purposely hid it from us, and maybe one day we'll return it.
Yeah, and there's a passage in the prophets where it mentions that the Ark of the Covenant should never be
Right. Many people claim to know where it is. There are many different theories: Ethiopia, Brazil, Rome, Vatican, Iran, Iraq, Jerusalem. But I mean, some of those places might have more validity to them than others. But again, I think it's not up to us to actually try and find it.
But what does Kohen HaGadol do here? Like, he just comes
So
in.
every year on Yom Kippur, he would come in with the blood of that sacrifice on Yom Kippur. He would sprinkle the blood in three places. First of all, he would sprinkle it on the horns of the altar of incense. That had blood on it only once a year, whereas outside it was every day of the year. Secondly, he would sprinkle it on the veil that separated between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. And thirdly, right here on the Ark of the Covenant itself. So it was made up of a few pieces. The main body was made of acacia wood covered in gold from the inside and outside. So it was 3 layers of gold, wood, gold. The poles to carry it were also acacia wood covered in gold. But the lid on top was actually made of pure gold. This in Hebrew is called hakaporet, which would translate to the atonement covering. And attached to it were 2 angels called cherubim, also made of pure gold. And similar to the menorah, the lid and the angels were also made of one solid piece of gold. Inside the ark were 3 things. So
The broken plates, the plates that the sacred
So-
plates, and
you're close on the challah, not quite.
Manna.
Manna, very good. Now, the broken tablets, the Torah never says clearly if the broken tablets were in there. So there's a lot of debate around that, if the broken ones were in there or not. But for sure, the second pair, the fixed pair, definitely were in there. So, but whether or not the broken ones were in there or not, I count it as one thing. So you got the tablets of the Ten Commandments, you got the manna, and one more thing. Not Moshe's staff, but
Aaron's stick.
Aaron's staff. Very good.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
When they had the argument with Korach, and they said put all the sticks, and then the stick of Aaron became with the
almond flour.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. Very good. It was through the staff that God showed the people of Israel that he indeed had chosen Aaron to be the high priest, and that it wasn't just nepotism just because he is the brother of Moses. So each of these three things represent our relationship with God. The Ten Commandments is the covenant between us and God. That's why in Hebrew they are called Luchot HaBrit, the tablets of covenant. The manna, that's the bread from heaven, that symbolizes God's provision in our lives. Just as he provided for the people of Israel when they were in the desert, God also provides for us every single day. And the staff of Aaron, we spoke about Aaron and his role as Kohen Gadol and mediator, right? But these are all things also that we as sinners have rejected and broken. The Ten Commandments, we've all broken the Ten Commandments, right? We've all lied, we've all stolen, we've all dishonored our parents, myself included. We are all guilty of breaking our covenant with God. The manna, the Israelites complained about the manna. They said, I don't want this. I want meat. I want to go back to Egypt.
Yeah.
Even today, we continue to complain and complain instead of being thankful for everything God does for us. And the staff, who chose Aaron to be Kohen Gadol? God, Hashem. Did the people of Israel accept it? No, they've rebelled against the authority that God had given to Moses and Aaron. Throughout the entire Tanakh, God keeps sending to the people of Israel all these prophets, prophet after prophet after prophet, and the people of Israel are so stubborn, they refuse to listen. We are the ones, and even today we like to reject the authority that God puts on our lives. We are the ones that have rejected what is required for us to have a relationship with God. But here's the good news. This is where God comes to us and shows his mercy and his love toward humanity and toward the Jewish people, that despite our unfaithfulness, God remains faithful. God has continued time and time again to protect us as a Jewish people and to fulfill his promise that he made to Abraham 4,000 years ago. We are God's chosen people, not because we are any better than the rest of the world. No, not at all. But rather, it's for God to demonstrate his love, his control, his sovereignty, his control over the course of history, that through the Jewish people, he would bless the rest of the world. It is all by what God has done for us because we can't do for ourselves. Similarly to how I said before, that the Israelites couldn't make the atonement sacrifice for themselves, but rather had to rely on someone higher than them, appointed by God to atone on their behalf. So,
You say that no one knows? No.
yeah, right. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And may God bless each and every one of you.
So, während wir gerade hier noch ein paar Probleme haben mit der Kameraeinstellung, wenn jetzt irgendjemand von unseren YouTube-Zuschauern Fragen hat, dann kann er jetzt bitte nochmal die Frage stellen, dann können wir die live beantworten. So, ich zeige in der Zwischenzeit nochmal, hier sind die
there were 4 layers that
Tafeln
cover the tent at top.
der
The first layer
Mandelstab,
is made
der
up of what
blühende
we
und
call the
das
holy
Manna,
colors,
so Manna.
which
In manchen
is more or less
Übersetzungen
in
steht der Koriander. Ich
more or
nehme an,
less in
deswegen haben die
the
Koriander genannt.
shades of blue, purple,
So.
red, and white, and
Haben wir eine
stitched into those
Frage?
colors were with golden stitching were also images of angels, of cherubim, Kelvin.
Okay.
But all that was just the first layer. That's what the Kohanim would have seen if they had come in here and looked up. On top of that, the second layer was goat fur. On top of that, the third layer was ram skin, dyed red color. And the fourth layer on top, on the very top, the most outer layer, was skin from an animal in Hebrew called tachash,
Okay.
which to this day nobody really knows what animal it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think it was?
The Christians believe that it was a sea animal, like a whale or a dolphin. I think that doesn't make sense for many reasons, that it was a sea animal. So I think it had to have been a land animal, but we don't know for sure.
Okay.
It had to have been kosher, and it had to have been durable. To last hundreds and hundreds of years, 480 years, it had to have been very durable and very strong.
So when you said the Mishkan and the old tabernacle, they were about 480 years.
Right.
So they never replaced anything.
They did replace the outer fence.
Okay.
When they arrived at Shiloh, they no longer had the outer fence, which during the time of the 40 years was made. The poles were made of acacia wood, with bases of copper and heads of silver. And when they arrived at Shiloh, all that was replaced with a stone wall or a brick wall.
Okay. But
Which parts of that wall is actually still there today? Yeah, as far as the
roof-
Mishkan itself,
the roof,
I believe stayed the same.
you know, if you have a normal roof and it rains and sun, you have some kind of corrosion, you know.
So that tachash skin probably also had to have been waterproof, probably.
Okay. But it all stayed stable.
As
all
far
the
as I
time.
know, yeah.
Oh, that's why the Christians think it's a sea creature because it's got.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Some rabbinic interpretations say that this animal was an animal that God had specifically created just for the tabernacle and went extinct immediately afterwards. But again, we don't know. So it may have been a dinosaur or a unicorn. Who knows?
Last question. In terms of Kaddish Kaddishim, there
Yes.
was no light.
There was no natural light. So
What does that mean?
there
Meaning that
was
when-
no natural source of light like the
Okay.
menorah was in the Kodesh. So either it was super dark, pitch black, or if there was light, there might have been light from God's presence.
Okay.
But the Bible
But,
doesn't say.
I mean, Kohen HaGadol, when he was coming here, he was not carrying any flame or.
No, the closest he did have was the mach
Right.
with the incense with a little bit of coal on it, but it probably wouldn't have been enough light to actually do something.
But when Moses came out of the tent, his face was shining.
Right.
So this implicates that the presence of God would have lightened all the room
Yeah.
if even his
And
face.
time and time again throughout
yes.
the Tanakh, the presence of God creates light.
Yes.
Not natural light, but supernatural light. But physical, visible light.
Beautiful light, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
It was
you
a
for
pleasure.
coming.
So we have a question from our community.
Yes.
That is Scotland.
Oh, live stream. Cool.
Yes, live stream. Is there a cooperation with Samaritans on Mount Gerizim?
The what?
So you read it from Mount Gerizim.
Gerizim?
I don't know exactly how it's
Samaritan-
meaning, but
Samaritans. This is a private business. It doesn't belong to Timna Park or anything. This is just a private business in cooperation with Timna Park.
it's separately.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Josef, ich hoffe, das hat deine Frage beantwortet. Ja,
Now the
I didn't realize we were live streaming, so hello everyone.
yeah. Right now the door were broken. Is this a door? No.
Yeah, this is
Ah.
the real one. Didn't have a door.
Ah,
Oh,
security
shalom. יש סיור. מה זה?
security door. wegen Brandschutz.
הבנתי. אוקיי, בדיוק עכשיו הגעתם? אז אני שנייה אצא ונתחיל.
Ah,
סבבה.
hey. זה שלי.
Oh,
תודה רבה.
cute.
So, die,
Very good. All right, I have to go out and take the next
habt ihr
tour.
das alles mal gesehen?
So,
So, hier
Thank you for
ist,
coming.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we
hier ist nochmal unser Plan.
yes.
So, wir
Hey,
sind jetzt hier durch alles durchgegangen.
it's a really cool device.
Ziemlich coole Nummer ist das gewesen.
okay.
So, ich sag vielleicht nochmal was zur Einführung. Wir hatten ja hier so eine kleine Einführung. Und wie gesagt, also das Material, was am meisten benutzt wurde, ist für den gesamten Bau, ne, für den Zaun und die Stiftshütte. Wir haben ja auch gelesen, dass der Brandopferaltar, der war eigentlich aus Holz mit Gold überzogen. Und auch die Bundeslade, nicht der Deckel, aber die Bundeslade. Und ist, wie gesagt, der Akazienbaum. Akazienholz wurde am meisten benutzt. Und er hat uns vor uns erzählt, dass das Akazienholz, hier steht, ein Akazienbaum, der halt ein bisschen tot aussieht. Da könnte man fast schon vergleichen mit dem wilden Ölbaum von Ephraim. So, und hier steht auch nochmal ein Akazienbaum. Der ist richtig grün. So, da. Ups. So, hier ist auch nochmal ein Akazienbaum. So, und der Akazienbaum war ein sehr schönes Gleichnis. Der steht für den Menschen, ne? Psalm 1, der gefallen hat am Gesetz Gottes, der ist wie ein Baum. So, und jetzt ist dieser Baum, der Mensch, ist halt mit Gold überzogen und soll halt umgewandelt werden, ne? Durch die Nähe zu Gott, durch das Halten der Gebote und so weiter, soll er sich halt selber heiligen und rein werden. Und er hat auch gesagt, für ihn war, weil wir haben in der Tora nur die Maße von der Stiftshütte, vom Mishkan. So, aber nicht vom Tempel, sondern es war halt die Idee, wahrscheinlich von David, der hat ja dann die Maße gegeben, andere Proportionen, den Tempel zu bauen. Aber dieser Mishkan, also nicht der hier per se, aber der Mishkan, der hat länger überdauert als alle beiden Tempel. Er hat von dem Auszug aus Ägypten, ne, das wurde wenn ich jetzt recht mich entsinne, am ersten Tag des ersten Monats, im zweiten Jahr des Auszuges wurde der Mishkan dann am Ende aufgestellt und hat halt bis wir lesen das in Könige, als der Salomon den Tempel gebaut hat, vom Auszug aus Ägypten sind es 480 Jahre. So, und der hat halt 480 Jahre überdauert, länger als der erste Tempel, der dann von den Babyloniern zerstört wurde und länger als der zweite Tempel, der von den Römern zerstört wurde. Und Salomon hat praktisch alle Materialien benutzt, die hier im Mishkan waren und hat den praktisch zum Tempel aufgebaut. So, und ich denke, das war eine super tolle, interessante Führung. Ja, damit ist alles gesagt. Und ich danke euch fürs Zuschauen. Unterstützt uns, liked das Video, teilt das Video, schickt vielleicht auch unseren Fundraiser raus, wenn euch das gefallen hat. Also wir sind, wie gesagt, extra jetzt hierher gefahren, um euch das mal zu zeigen. Und wir fahren jetzt hier noch ein bisschen durch den Timna-Park, gucken uns das an und dann würde ich sagen, vielen Dank und bis später.